Hello everyone, it's incumbent upon me to start making more YouTube videos now. Having sort of achieved a sort of notoriety, if you like. Journalists are always about the story rather than them being the story, and the whole idea that you would be the story is quite odd to me. There is a story that needs to be told, and it is about the absolute brutality of this Ukrainian regime. So we're going to go through a few things that this Ukrainian regime has been doing since 2014, long before any Russians got there. And believe me when I tell you that the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republican Army was formed out of the necessity to try and answer back the killing and the brutality that went on. If you haven't seen Anne-Laure Bonnell's documentary called Donbas, which is English subtitled, on this channel on YouTube, I would advise very, very strongly, if you are against this video or do not know or are even for it, to go and watch her documentary. It's absolutely brilliant. And it was made many, many years ago. Now, this very brave French journalist, along with many others, tried to get French TV interested in this documentary. No one wanted to know. Eventually, it was published, and eventually, people, limited amount of people, were able to see exactly what was going on. Now, when we talk about the brutality of this Ukrainian regime, we're talking about Poroshenko, who came into power and said in a speech, and I have it on my Telegram, my Twitter, everything else that I can't put here, that these people were going to be made to hide in cellars. And he was speaking about the Russian-speaking people of the Donbas region. Donetsk city, to this very day, I have a good friend, an Australian journalist at Cafe Revolution. I'm going to give him a shout out here. If you want to see what's happening in Donetsk city every single day, and there is not a military installation anywhere near. This includes youngsters blowing their hands off with cluster munitions. This includes bombing with cluster munitions a maternity unit in the city, and various atrocities. Far too many to mention. They have been shelling and killing and sniping at the people in the Donbass, and especially in those 8 oblasts. There is no level of brutality that this Ukrainian regime will not stoop to. We are talking only a few days ago, and once again, a shout out to Cafe Revolution, of Ukraine launching a missile at a marketplace in Donetsk city, waiting until that marketplace was full of people and then launching a missile at it. It struck a building on the way to the marketplace. Now, this was a very, very fortunate incident for the people of Donetsk. It would have cost well over 100 lives. 2 days later, we have an incident, don't we, which is Russia blamed for once again, and the heat map clearly shows the rocket once again, as it was at the pharmacy. If you remember that incident when everybody came out and blamed Russia, was clearly launched by the Ukrainians from the heat map. Well, the same source tells me that the heat map came from the same side. It came from the Ukrainian side that shelled these people. Now, it is beyond the pale, isn't it, that they would try to do that in Donetsk, and then suddenly they do it in an area that is predominantly wants to remain Russian and is under the jackboot of this brutal ethnic cleansing regime. I can't use the other word because it would get banned off of this channel. YouTube, you need to sort it out as well in demonetizing people who are telling the truth about this war. It is incumbent upon you to allow free speech and to allow the other side of the argument to be put forward, and also to not obfuscate or block or in any way cover up the truth of what is going on. We are supporting, and we in the West are on a horribly, horribly wrong side here. We only have to look, and of course, I am the gentleman who broke the story first about the Ukrainian NAZI guy, for you American listeners, in the Canadian Parliament. and of course, I was paid a visit for that. The trouble that we have is that this guy got up in front of the parliament in a atmosphere of zealotry against the Russian people. Now, me personally, I don't have a dog in either fight. I'm British, uh, and I was in the military, and I understand how these things go. What I do not understand is why you would allow somebody with a war record such as him of brutality, hatred, and death and destruction to receive a standing ovation. It was indeed incumbent upon them to know. Now, sitting in the front row, obviously, were the Deputy Commissioner of the Canadian Royal Mounted Police and a very high ranking serving military officer, as well as two bodyguards, as well as Yaroslav Hunka, who was the gentleman in question who received the round of applause twice, standing ovations. It was also Martin Hunka, his son, was there. Now, his son and his company made a donation to Rota, the Speaker of the House. Now, are you telling me that the people sitting there did not know who these two people were? The person who organises the seating plan is a woman called Karina Gould. Now, Karina Gould has, without doubt, access to the files that show who all these people are. Do you honestly think that you aren't thoroughly vetted? I've been in the Houses of Parliament in Britain. I was thoroughly vetted before I was let in just to go to a conference between 20 or 30 people. There is no doubt whatsoever that the Speaker of the House knew, that Zelensky knew, that Freeland knew, and that Karina Gould knew, as did the gentleman sitting in the front row. That you would not check out either, as Putin has said in his speech, makes you complete idiots, which I don't believe for 1 second, or it makes you complicit. And that is exactly what they were. It may also interest you to know that over 3,000 Ukrainians settled in the North Bay area in northeastern Ontario from Ukraine, and also quite a few of Mussolini's Italian supporters fled to this area of Canada. They've never really deported anybody seriously who is guilty of war crimes, and indeed the local high school was done for throwing up Nazi salutes before soccer or football games, if you're English. Then we get back to the brutality of the regime of the Ukrainians, beating up their own people and throwing them in vans. You've only got to go and look on my Twitter or my Telegram to see this happening, and it is quite disgusting that they would do this. And that also tells you, does it not, how reluctant the Ukrainian civilians are to fight in this war. They don't want a bar of it. They're being forced into it. This is ethnic cleansing of their own people, as well as people in the Donbas. Now, there are many, many documented evidences by the human rights organisation, Human Rights Watch, and also by Amnesty International, of the brutality that has been carried out on the people of the Donbas for 8 or 9 years now, almost going on 10. And even now, today, they take time out of their busy schedule fighting the Russians to shell Donetsk city every single day of the conflict from a place called Adivka. And it is maybe 2 or 3, even 4, and up to 5 times a day. There is no question whatsoever that this brutal regime will carry on doing exactly what it wants to do. And we have to remember where this regime came from. We have to also look at the England football team. They go and play, and they're quite happy to take a knee against racism. And I would honestly say that ethnic cleansing is about the biggest form of racism you can get. And yet there are Azov Battalion, Black Sun, Waffen SS. They join the two together, and that is the shield of the Azov battalions, which are these ethnic cleansing lunatics that pervade our society. And the England team did absolutely nothing. Now, when Kosovo saw Serbian banners in a game, they walked off the pitch in protest. And yet England take the knee and then play in a stadium bedecked by all these symbols of this ethnic cleansing regime. And let's be absolutely brutally clear here. We get it so wrong in this country because we call everything far right. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Far right means you're not far wrong when they label you with that. Most of these regimes, Hitler was a socialist. Okay, you go and have a look. Russia believed in the bad old days. It is not the same now, and the trouble is we get caught up in that, don't we? The Stalinism and everything else. Russia is not the same as it was. In fact, most of their media is openly critical. In Ukraine, you can get killed for criticising the government. All the opposition are locked up or dead. The journalists are either locked up, Gonzalo Lira, for instance, or they are on a Ukrainian kill list called Miratolet. And if you go and have a look on this kill list, at one stage they even had the Pope on it and then took him off. There are many, many journalists on there, and indeed it's probably a badge of honour to be on there because it means you're actually telling the truth. You can get 5 years in jail for even taking a photograph of any hit that comes from the Russian side into Ukraine. You can be locked up in jail for 5 years for refusing to take part in a fight that is nothing to do with you. And there is no doubt whatsoever when you look back at Victoria Nuland. There's a wonderful film by Igor Lopatonov, and it is called The Maidan Massacre. Type in Maidan Massacre, go and have a look at that film, and you will see how the US overthrew the democratically elected representatives of the Ukrainian people. And it was simply because they didn't want to take the IMF loan. Now, anybody who goes and looks at these atrocities on either of these films and still wants to support this brutal regime that forces people to go and fight, that sends soldiers to the front in civilian vehicles to get blown up halfway across an open meadow, is absolutely beyond the pale. And if you're one of them, I pity you and you disgust me, because it is without doubt whatsoever a mass, shall we say, suicide that the Ukrainian people are being forced to take part in by one of the most brutal regimes that's ever existed. And we are funding that in the West. I've got no love either way. I don't have a dog in this fight, but I know brutality and horror when I see it. And that people are turning a blind eye or putting their head in the sand because of this is quite disgraceful. Now, let's get very quickly onto what happened in Anne-Laure Bonnell's documentary. On there, you will see Ukrainians mining and mining water holes, using schools and hospitals to shield behind. Now, the Russians have always turned around and said that they don't target civilians, and by and large, that is the case. It is, everybody goes on about Bucha, but Bucha, when people go and look, there was a French medic serving with the Azov battalions, and he states quite clearly that he was there as a medic with the Azov battalions when this so-called atrocity by the Russians was meant to be carried out. And he states quite clearly that the reason Azov butchered these people was because they didn't fight against the Russians or what was the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republican Army. And that's what people get wrong as well. It wasn't the Russian army that got chased off. It was withdrawn by Putin because there was going to be a deal signed for peace. Boris Johnson scuppered that. He has blood on his hands, as does Joe Biden. Now, very, very simply, the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republican Army retreated, and then the Ukrainians counterattacked with everything they had and took some of that land back. Then they came up against the proper Russian army. And ever since then, they have been losing people hand over fist. They have lost over 550,000 troops since this conflict began. They've lost 90,000 plus in the counter-offensive, dead or wounded so severely that they can't return to the battlefield. They have raised the age of conscription, and they are beating people up and throwing them into vans to send them to a slaughterhouse after only 2 weeks of training. The war is absolutely brutal, and NATO and the USA and my terrible, terrible government here in the UK will only push people forward now to try in the eastern part of NATO to go and fight. They tried it with Poland. Poland made lots of noise until they realised and withdrew. Obviously, there is an election coming up, and the Polish people are not really interested in a war. And to be honest with you, only the most rabid people are interested in a war with Russia. It is, if you don't learn from history, and that's what it's there for. But we have the BLM and everybody else to thank for that, don't we, of trying to eradicate history. History's there to learn from, not to dismiss as though it never happened. Going into Russia, they use winter as a weapon. And this winter, Kupiansk is about to find out, like Bakhmut did last winter. NATO are on a loser. They know it, and they're trying to find a way out. Just have a think for a minute about how much NATO have tried to get this conflict going into other areas. Okay, we've got Kosovo, Serbia now with tons and tons of weaponry on the borders facing each other. We had Armenia and Azerbaijan, didn't we? And we have proven in various videos that NATO was crawling around, the French military intelligence service was crawling around in Ukraine since 2020, and we have the documented evidence to prove that. They have tried on many fronts, and in fact, they would like to start a war in China. They'd like to start a second front anywhere, because this is going so disastrously wrong. Ukraine don't have an air force. Russia can build quicker. They've got better equipment. And many, many months ago, I was speaking about sending tanks in was absolute folly because of the Coronet missiles, and so it proved. Bradleys, Challengers, Leopards, they're all going to come the same. We keep hearing about these weapons that they're sending, that the West is going to send over, as though they are some sort of wonder weapon that's going to change the war. And time after time, I was warning that if you put these tanks on the front line, they would get blown up before they even saw action. And nobody was listening. And Coronet missiles, which have a distance of over 10,000 yards, were able to take these tanks out. In fact, so bad was it, there was actually a game in the Russian military about how far. It was called the Flying Turret Leopard Turret of the Month Award. And the idea was to hit the top of the tank in a way that would make the turret fly as high as humanly possible. This is the sort of brutality of the war that we are facing. When you think that the Surovikin line has not even been breached, and I was saying many, many months ago that they had to reach Tokmak, the Sea of Azov, Melitopol, and break the Crimean land bridge. None of that has happened, and they've lost 90,000 men in doing it. It is incumbent upon us to put a stop to this war, and that is going to result in Putin having exactly what he hinted in his speech and what I've been saying for months. Putin isn't interested in a Vietnam-style occupation of Kiev. What he wants is those 8 oblasts that are Russian-speaking people that he now considers to be Russian to be part of Russia. And Ukraine and NATO and the US are going to have to concede that if they don't want this war to continue. If they do, then on it will go. And my best estimate here is we're going well into spring next year. Odessa will be part of that, and Crimea is not even on the table, because as far as the Russians are concerned, they occupy it. And I always ask these people, when they ask me, where do you think this war is going to go? The 8 oblasts, Odessa will be difficult for Russia to take, but not impossible, and Crimea. And that will be Russia's stop, and then it will be a demilitarized zone from there on in. There is no point going any further, because you end up with a Vietnam-style situation, and we all saw what happened to America when they did that. So let's go get one thing absolutely clear here. Russia are going nowhere. Putin is going nowhere. Now, what people don't realize in the West is Russia do wars of attrition. So they just let you dash yourself on the rocks, and then they come in and smash you, and then they retreat a little bit further back. and you send more people in and they get killed once again. Russia do wars of attrition. Putin is seen as a spiritual leader as well as a political one. Now, I do not mean to be horrible to political leaders in our countries, in most of the NATO countries, but they are horrible, horrible human beings who nobody in their right mind would honestly go and fight for. Russians are different. They see a spiritual leader, and everybody fights for a spiritual leader much harder than they do for a political one. There are many, many Russians that I speak to, and many, many Ukrainians I speak to, that have friends on both sides of this conflict, and it's Slavs killing Slavs. And we need to put a stop to this, and we need to put a stop to it very, very quickly. Otherwise, more Ukrainians are going to die, and NATO and the US and the UK are going to talk people into getting killed on other Eastern NATO countries. Because if Britain were to send a force into another country at this moment in time, and to send it, into the Russian sphere at this moment in time, they've probably got about 30 to 40 proper fighting troops. The Ukrainians lost 120,000 of their best soldiers in Bakhmut in 7 months. How long do you think it would take to wipe out the British armed forces if they decided to go in? They might damage the Russians quite severely, but they'd run out of men very, very quickly indeed.